In this video, I want to talk about three things that may at first appear, unconnected or not as connected as you might think, but I'll try to tie them all together and draw out a reasonably interesting conclusion for you. So the first one I want to talk about is Donald Trump. Is that guy not? Now it's Epstein and the client list, and what a gong show that is down there. Now here's an interesting thing. I subscribe to all kinds of newsletters and Substacks and press releases and so on as a journalist, and I get the ones I get from the United States are just filled with all kinds of analysis about the damage that Trump is doing to the business of government. I mean, he's essentially, so they would argue, dismantling the foundations of democracy, and everything from ICE immigrants, rounding up immigrants, to ignoring court orders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not hard to see all of the what he's doing with Epstein and the other issues that he keeps throwing out there. Is he's basically the circus master, who's trying to distract the audience from the fact that he's burning down the big top for the insurance money. But there's a very interesting Substack by a fellow named Mike Brock. I interviewed him last week, and I'd hoped that we would spend more time on one of his posts, which was all about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the democratic constraints to wealth accumulation that came out of the New Deal in the 1930s. And this is the second thing I want to talk about. And so what Brock had argued in the Substack that I thought was very interesting is, it's generally accepted that FDR basically saved the American economic system, their form of capitalism, because by 1933, absolutely no, those poor unemployed. I mean, the poor were at the gates with the pitchforks, and they were going to eat the rich. And so the rich, in order to save their own bacon, agreed to the New Deal. That's the way the argument goes. And the important thing here is what Brock says is that what Trump represents is the dismantling of all of those democratic constraints to wealth accumulation that FDR brought in, 80 years ago, 90 years ago. And that's why the Broligarchs, the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos and so on, why they support Trump is because the tax breaks, the looting of the Treasury, the removal of, basically Trump has taken off the brakes on their ability to accumulate wealth. And the fact that he's doing it on the backs of poor people, old people, veterans, and so on, doesn't bother him in one bit, apparently. In fact, he's the anti-FDR. He's enabling and abetting the Broligarchs, the new robber barons, for the modern age. He's basically enabling them. And this is one of the things that Brock says Americans have to fight back against, because it's going to lead to chaos and civil war, just as he argues it would have had FDR not stepped in with the New Deal. So there's going to have to be like a New Deal 2.0 at some point, a new social compact, economic compact, in order for people to again believe in the American dream and think that they can have a middle-class lifestyle and so on. So this is very interesting. Now here's where I want to draw, and this is the third thing I want to talk about, the parallel to Canada. Because one of the things I've noticed since Mark Carney became Prime Minister in March and then won the election, and now he's passed Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act, which has two parts for those who aren't following the story. The first one is create free trade between provinces, east and west, right from the east coast to the west coast and the north coast. So they're going ahead with that, and then the other, of course, half of it is the fast tracking of major projects that are in the national interest. And What that's done is it's drawn out all of these so-called thought leaders, from around the oil and gas industry and the pipeline industry and the mining industry and the banking, and they're absolutely giddy with the opportunities that they think this is going to produce. And it kind of reminds me, it's the Canadian version of what Trump is doing with the Broligarchs. The Broligarchs are all excited because they're adding to their billions. It's almost like they've got a billion, some kind of one of those thermometers you see in small town, hockey rinks when they're fundraising. But their thermometer is going up like it's superheated. It's kind of like that. There's a parallel there, where those who have money and capital and want to deploy it, and they think this is a huge opportunity. And here's the problem. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, if there's an investment opportunity, we need capital. We're a small economy, open economy. We've never had adequate supplies of domestic capital. We've always had to invite foreign direct investment into the economy. I get that. That's not going to go away. Government can't replace it, and so on. I worry about the Canadian taxpayer, and I is one. Right? What kind of regulations are going to have to be rolled back as a concession to create the certainty? This is the big deal for investors. They want certainty, regulatory certainty. And so look at the oil and gas industry. They want every Trudeau-era regulation that they dislike dismantled. And that includes Bill C-69, Bill C-48, the Clean Fuel Standard Bill, the oil and gas emissions cap, on and on. I mean, they've got a long list, and that's like a basic requirement before the pipeline industry will step up and even consider a proposal. And then we've tossed in already, from federal taxpayers, $8,000 into carbon capture storage for the oil sands. Well, that literally covers 10 to 12% of the oil sands emissions. So if we're going to go to the end and do this the way Carney says, we're going to decarbonize the oil sands, then now you've got 8 to 10 times more capital that needs to be thrown in. So what is that? I don't know how much it's going to end up exactly, but I will say that Alex Pourbaix, who was the former CEO of Cenovus Energy, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, he was in the media saying that decarbonizing the oil sands would cost $75 billion, of which he said the taxpayer, whether it's provincial or federal, would have to pay $50 billion. Well, at the rate we're going, I think it's going to be a lot more than $50 billion. That's just the oil and gas portion of this. Now we're looking at building, and that's just the decarbonization of the oil sands. We've got other oil and gas production in other provinces. We've got this 100 million barrel a day pipeline that Alberta Premier Daniel Smith wants to build to Prince Rupert, and then never mind the talk of pipelines to Churchill, Manitoba on the north coast, and one to the east coast, or at least to southern Ontario. I don't believe for a moment that the giddy capitalists the bankers, the investors, the companies, the incumbents, will be dipping into our pocket for subsidies and they'll come up with some kind of flimsy justification. And nobody's talking about this. I did a video today. I talked about where are the skeptics. It's all well and good to believe in the airy-fairy story, the positive narrative. Everybody gets pumped up. It's the hype cycle, right? Before you get into the realities of a new technology, you go through this hype cycle, which never turns out to be accurate. And then the bubble bursts, and then eventually the reality of the technology kind of climbs up and becomes competitive. We're in the hype cycle. And I worry that in the name of, serving capital, in the name of wealth accumulation, that we are going to have to write checks to these industries and make concessions on regulations and so on. And maybe we do, and maybe we don't. Maybe there are other ways to do it. But where are the skeptics? Where are the people who are going to stand up and protect the interests of the taxpayer, because I guess basically the Canadian taxpayer and Alberta taxpayers. I'm worried.